Guardian, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 3. Sundial of Reincarnation Part 2. It was one of Dragon City University's small back doors. Dragon City University was a famous school with a long history. It was almost the start of the school year, but there weren't a lot of people on campus as the main campus had long since been moved to the suburbs, and the old campus that remained was rarely used by students, although it was sometimes visited by tourists. Zhao Yunlan, carrying the black cat, was waiting at the entrance of a residential hall. Guo Changcheng finally arrived. Only then did Zhao Yunlan realize that the intern was rather shabby looking, hunched forward, always as if shamefully looking down. His fringe almost covered both his eyes, and he was dressed in all black as if going to a funeral. As Guo Changcheng approached, Zhao Yunlan asked the cat in his arms, "Will this kid be all right?" "What do you think?" Wang Zheng said to him. "He looks devastated." The black cat yawned in disinterest. "You're too worrisome, Mama Zhao." Guo Changcheng sheepishly stumbled forward, saying, "I'm here." Zhao Yunlan teased him, "Who told you to come along? And why can't you speak up a little?" Guo Changcheng trembled and began muttering inaudibly, sounding almost like a moaning puppy. "Meow," said Diching the cat. Zhao Yunlan was a bit disappointed. He'd never noticed that this newcomer was the type who couldn't even speak properly. "You roughly know what happened, right? This is where the victim lived. Let's go inside." Zhao Yunlan headed in, only to soon realize that no one was following him. He turned back to find Guo Changcheng in an awkward staring contest with a mean-looking security guard. Trying not to get mad, he called out to Guo Changcheng as if calling a dog, "Come on, let's go. She knows who we are, just come on in." Zhao Yunlan's first impression of Guo Changcheng could be summarized in two words: this idiot. Room 202 was a standard student apartment for two. The black cat, bouncing off of Zhao Yunlan, began to thoroughly scavenge under the bed, under the closet, and the window sill. Suddenly, it smelled something by the window and sneezed heavily. After the big scare he received the night before, Guo Changcheng closely examined Big Chief Zhao, and much to his relief, he realized that the handsome boss indeed had a shadow, and from his exhausted and messy look after working overtime, confirmed that he was certainly human. And so, Guo Changcheng eagerly followed behind the chief. Zhao Yunlan took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, put one in his mouth and swiftly lit it up. He leaned forward and gave the cat a pat on the butt so it would step aside. Finally, he blew a cloud of smoke onto the windowsill. "Look," Zhao Yunlan said. Guo Changcheng looked towards the windowsill, and to his amazement, a handprint appeared where there was nothing just a moment ago. Zhao Yunlan calmly gave the windowsill a sniff. "It's not particularly stinky. Only a cat like you can pick up the smell." The black cat replied, "It's not that." Guo Changcheng, frozen in terror, stared at the talking cat and quivered helplessly. Zhao Yunlan shook his head thoughtfully, "I'm afraid not, lethal things can't have this smell." He opened the window and turned back to see the stupefied Guo Changcheng, visibly horrified. Zhao Yunlan rather enjoyed torturing him. "Hey kid, you go up there and see what's outside the window." Guo Changcheng's only reply was an "eh." "Come on, young man. Wise up and get up there." Guo Changcheng nervously gulped and helplessly stared at the window. It was too high off the ground for him. but it takes just as much courage to turn around and tell the chief that he couldn't do it. In a difficult dilemma, this poor kid could only reluctantly climb onto the windowsill, tightly clutching the window frame as hard as he could. He moved his head around with great difficulty, cautiously looking out the window. Suddenly, seeing a reflection on the open window, the hair on his entire body stood upright in fear. To his astonishment, alongside the reflection of his own figure on the window, there was another shadow. A human skeleton could be seen in the reflection, inexplicably laying right beside him, arm extending through his ankle and onto the windowsill where there was a hand mark, looking into the apartment. Guo Changcheng looked at the windowsill, but there was nothing. He couldn't believe his eyes. His chest froze in pain and he began struggling to breathe. The skeleton then turned its head towards him and looked right at him through the reflection. There seemed to be a person in the hollow eyeholes of the skull. The person was covered in a black cloak, mysteriously shrouded in a cloud of black mist, and holding some strange object. Guo Changcheng had yet to figure out what that strange object was when he was disrupted by a man below. "Hey student, what are you doing up there?" Startled, Guo Changcheng slipped on some lichen on the windowsill and fell victim to gravity. With quick reflexes, Zhao Yunlan rushed forward to grab him but was a split second too late and only managed to grab his hair. Out of pain, Guo Changcheng wriggled, causing Zhao Yunlan's hand to slip, and down he fell. The black cat, calmly sitting on the windowsill, sluggishly wagged its tail. Meow. Shit. Zhao Yunlan rushed out of the room and dashed downstairs. This knucklehead. Fortunately, the man standing below gave Guo Changcheng a hand, who barely survived the fall. The man was tall and lean, dressed very formally in a white, long-sleeved shirt and pants even in the height of summer. With rimless glasses, along with the textbooks he carried in his hand, it gave him a cultured and pristine image. "Are you all right? Do you know how dangerous that was?" Instead of replying, Guo Changcheng looked back up at the windowsill to confirm that there was indeed no skeleton. Guo Changcheng sat on the ground, dumbfounded. "Your legs are shaking, huh? Be more careful next time." The spectacled man slightly bent forward and patiently said, "The university forbids climbing. So if you get caught, your grades will be deducted." Guo Changcheng's head lifelessly drooped down, thinking that he might be naturally retarded after all. If there had been no one for him to sponge off of, there probably would not have been any hope for him. It was his first day at work and he was already on the verge of insanity. Zhao Yunlan hurriedly arrived and picked Guo Changcheng up by the back of his collar as if picking up a small chick. If it wasn't for him keeping his image as the calm and reserved Chief Zhao, he would have smacked this idiot on the head with his shoe. Zhao Yunlan forced himself to turn away. One more look at this moron and he swore. "Hi," he offered the spectacled gentleman a handshake. "The name's Zhao. We're from the MPS, and you are?" In just a split second, the spectacled man seemed astonished, but he rapidly adjusted himself as if nothing had happened and returned the handshake. "It's Shen Wei. I'm a professor here." "My apologies, I thought he was a student." Shen Wei's hand felt almost icy, like that of a dead corpse straight out of a refrigerator. Zhao Yunlan hesitated and curiously looked up at Shen Wei, who happened to be looking the same way. Although he quickly turned away, Zhao Yunlan found his gaze rather suspicious. Inexplicably so, as though this was not the first time they'd meet each other. As a criminal investigation officer, albeit the unorthodox type, Zhao Yunlan had to be skilled at memorizing faces, even those who he'd only briefly glanced at. And he was certain that he had never seen this person before. At this instance, the ball of black fur wiggled its butt and crawled towards the professor. It gave Shen Wei's feet a thorough sniff, circled his leg a few times, and softly purred at him. Master De Ching usually kept his cool and looked down upon all pathetic Homo sapiens with disinterest and disdain. Shen Wei, though, seemed to be an exception. Zhao Yunlan was stunned at the cat's abnormal behavior. It was inexplicably friendly and cute towards Shen Wei, and even stood on two hind legs, asking for a hug. Shen Wei picked up the cat, who gently meowed in comfort, its emerald eyes gazing at the spectacled man. Zhao Yunlan noticed a seemingly bewildering connection. Quite a while later, Shen Wei reluctantly returned the cat to Zhao Yunlan, giving it a pat on the head. While doing so, he asked, "This cat is very smart. What's its name?" De Cheng. And Zhao Yunlan carelessly added, "Nickname Fatty, also known as Dad Fat Fuck." The black cat howled and instantly turned evil. Its fur stood upright and its claws assaulted Zhao Yunlan. "Ha ha, he is mad," Shen Wei laughed gently and held one of its paws in his hand. The cat retracted its claws and eagerly let him pat it on the head. "I heard about the incident," spoke Shen Wei. "So the victim is from our school." The chief glanced at Guo Chang, who sheepishly took out a photograph and a student card of a female student and handed them to Shen Wei with trembling hands. "Professor Shen, pleased to meet you. Will you take a look and, do you recognize this person?" End of the chapter. Chapter 4. Sundial of Reincarnation Part 3. Dragon City University's old main building, built in the 1910s, was now at least 100 years old. Lush woods saturated the campus, some towering over every building, all which were built in a Western architectural style and were particularly ancient. Only the administration building, which had only been built these recent years near the west gate, was relatively taller, going past layers upon layers of trees. Amongst this field of old buildings, it stuck out like a sore thumb and completely destroyed the aesthetic of the campus. Professor Shen said that he didn't recognize the student and offered to take them to the office to investigate. Zhao Yunlan was amazed by the modernized office building. It had 18 floors, he realized without counting. In the prior years, property developers always used to avoid buildings with 18 floors. But after the economy boomed and property prices kept rising, people started caring less about superstition and more about money. Only those who knew the business would spot the problem right away. Perhaps due to the air conditioning, a sudden chilling breeze came gushing forward as soon as one entered the office building. The cat De Ching shivered a bit, extended its claws and tightly grabbed hold of Zhao Yunlan. "The student card says Faculty of Mathematics. The office is on the top floor," said Shen Wei, leading the two into the elevator. Zhao Yunlan suddenly asked, "Professor Shen, you don't seem very curious about this incident. There is nothing you'd like to ask?" With his head slightly bent, Shen Wei replied softly, "I respect the dead, and I will do whatever I can to help you solve this case, but I don't need to know the details." Zhao Yunlan, occasionally stroking the cat, continued, "Rarely do we meet good citizens like you. Even De Ching seems to have taken a liking to you." Shen Wei smiled gently, "It's what I should do." Zhao Yunlan remained silent for a while and glanced at Shen Wei. He'd noticed that there was something unusual about the professor. He had been avoiding eye contact ever since they'd locked eyes with each other earlier. The elevator abruptly stopped at the 4th floor and the lights started to flicker. Panicked, Guo Chang looked at Chief Zhao in desperation. But Zhao Yunlan was awfully calm, still intently scrutinizing the professor. A creepy voice, that of a male's, echoed through the elevator, "Professor Shen, what brings you to the 18th floor?" Shen Wei flatly replied, "There was an accident in school." These two are from the MPS. I'm taking them to the Faculty of Mathematics for some inquiries. Oh, the voice appeared to be rather slow-witted, only replying after a long pause, right, take care. Suddenly, the elevator returned to normal and the lights turned back on, as if nothing had happened in the first place. Scared, Shen Wei turned around, still avoiding Zhao Yunlan, and explained to Guo Changcheng, that was the security guard. Last semester, a student jumped off the building from the top floor. So ever since then, whoever's not from the faculty will be questioned before they can go up to the 18th floor. Guo Changcheng giggled in embarrassment, feeling relieved, and here I thought it was a ghost. Shen Wei asked half-jokingly. Guo Changcheng's face turned pale and taut. Zhao Yunlan, though, had other worries on his mind. This office building with terrible feng shui and a professor who inexplicably avoided eye contact were both equally bizarre. As for the responsible security guard, perhaps he wasn't just a security guard after all. Finally, they arrived at the 18th floor, all the way at the top of the building. The entire floor was empty. Being as gloomy and frigidly humid as it was, not even a mosquito or gecko would ever consider settling here. Zhao Yunlan inadvertently sneezed. Shen Wei swiftly turned around and asked, "Have you caught a cold?" Though he avoided direct eye contact with Zhao Yunlan still, his query was surprisingly genuine. Perhaps he possessed some sort of unique charisma, but Professor Shen's every movement seemed extremely gentle. Whilst his eyes were unfocused and murky, they were not unsettling to look at. Zhao Yunlan rubbed his nose slightly. "No, I am just allergic to the smell of mind-boggling, never-ending math homework." Shen Wei wore a kind and reserved smile. "Don't laugh at me," Zhao Yunlan began jokingly, "I'm telling the truth, Professor Shen. When I was a student, none of the teachers liked me. My class teacher even said that I would grow up to be a gangster. Who would have thought that I would end up where I am today? When I saw him again years later, can you guess what he said to me?" Shen Wei, listening with interest, "What did he say?" That cynical old man said, "You see, Zhao, I was right. You've become a uniformed gangster." Perhaps due to his experience as a high-tier officer, Chief Zhao was well versed with the courtesy of small talk. Just the math homework joke had gotten Guo Changcheng to loosen up. Possibly resonating with the chief, he followed behind him more eagerly. But as for Professor Shen, his expression as he listened to Zhao Yunlan was one filled with such attentiveness and interest that Zhao Yunlan began to have an illusion that what he spoke of was about some highly complex and important issue that Shen Wei needed to dedicate all his attention towards, rather than some simple small talk. But as he listened, he never once looked at Zhao Yunlan. And despite the fact that his smile appeared to be warm and courteous, the more Zhao Yunlan looked at it, the more he realized how formalized it was. It looked as though it was stenciled in. Zhao Yunlan was suspicious of his ability to smile continuously. The three walked and talked like this for a while. Their footsteps resounded through the floor and echoed down the corridors. Their laughter engulfed the sound of their footsteps, while obscuring the subtle treads of a fourth person. Rustling and coarse, like the sound of a pair of soft-soled cloth shoes. The administrative office building was built in the style of the so-called tower buildings, with the elevator in the middle and each floor in a circular shape around the center. As they moved forward, Guo Changcheng realized that Chief Zhao's wristwatch had undergone an uncanny change. At the center of the watch where the hour and minute hands met, a touch of crimson rose began to spread like ripples on water. Guo Changcheng, after hesitating for a while, finally whispered, "Chief. Chief Zhao, your watch. What? Has it turned red?" Zhao Yunlan turned back wearing his iconic smirk. Do you know why? Guo Changcheng shook his head. Zhao Yunlan chuckled jokingly. Ghosts love red, and since this building has bad feng shui, there is probably something evil lurking in the shadows, playing tricks on us. Guo Changcheng's face turned pale. He rigidly turned his head to look at the watch once more, but this time instead, he saw the reflection of an old lady. She was, rather plump, dressed in all black and was vacantly glaring at him. Guo Changcheng's feet halted. Zhao Yunlan laughed and turned a small switch on the watch. The case, suddenly filled with mist, washed away the bloody color. The wristwatch instantly returned back to normal, no blood red, and no female ghost. Have you never seen color-changing watches? Silly kid, so gullible. Zhao Yunlan teased the trainee, but then swiftly turned to Shen. Professor Shen, you're an intellectual, so you must not believe in ghosts. Professor Shen, still avoiding eye contact with Zhao Yunlan, adjusted his glasses and slowly replied, as the old saying goes, the wise never speaks of that which is out of this world. Nobody knows if there are ghosts, so there is no need to dwell on this. If we can't even understand our own lives fully, why should we care about what's beyond us? A very educated reply, but it didn't seem like Shen Wei really answered the question after all. As Zhao Yunlan failed to get anything out of the professor, he changed the subject. Professor Shen, you teach arts, I suppose? Yes, I teach Chinese and a few arts electives. I see. By the way, I heard from some friends in the property business that new residential buildings nowadays rarely use the structure of this building, only giant commercial buildings do. It really is bad feng shui, very little natural light indoors and also difficult to maintain. Zhao Yunlan took out a pack of cigarettes. Is smoking forbidden here? Shen Wei shook his head. Zhao Yunlan took a cigarette and lighted with one hand, with the other still in his pocket. A cloud of white smoke swiveled out of his mouth. Shen Wei frowned. Tobacco is bad for your health. Chief Zhao is still so young, you better not smoke too much. Zhao Yunlan gently smiled and didn't respond. Smoke covered his face and obscured his expression. The ashes from his cigarette landed on Shen Wei's shadow. Zhao Yunlan, looking at the ground while fanning the smoke away, replied with, this job is rather stressful, I often have to work overtime. So inevitably, I have some bad habits that I just can't get rid of. Shen Wei looked as if he wanted to say something, but he simply frowned and then, oddly enough, changed the subject. There aren't many faculties that use the old main campus. Only a few floors in this building are occupied, the other rooms are all vacant, round this corner and we're there. Shadowy and frigid places were prone to mold and moss, and perhaps, other things as well. For unknown reasons, the corners in this building were close to right angles, whilst the corridors circled around the center, giving the interior a most bizarre structure. Also, in the convoluted and narrow corridors, the possibility of frequently bumping into each other was extremely high. Shen Wei led the group ahead and Zhao Yunlan, holding the cat, followed behind, and finally with Guo Changcheng bringing up the rear. As they approached the corner, Guo Changcheng had an inkling that something might leap out of the shadows. Uneased, he stared intently at the shadowy corner. Suddenly, Guo Changcheng realized that within the shadows, something was moving. It was as if someone was hiding within the shadows, and from that darkness emerged a shape, a hand. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.